Good evening, my name is Daniel Romero. I am currently 38 years old. When I was 24, I migrated to the United States, and yes, I did it illegally. I made several attempts because the first 2 times things didn't go very well, but I eventually managed to cross. Now, I live here and have obtained my residency. However, the reason for this email is to share with you one of the many horrifying experiences I encountered while trying to cross into the United States illegally. Walking through endless stretches of wilderness, night would fall so quickly. When you're walking in such desolate places, it feels like daylight lasts no time at all, and the nights in those places are very cold and eerie. This happened the first time I tried to cross. I was with a small group of people who were also attempting to cross. We had already been walking for an entire day through the mountains. We were very tired and had little energy to keep going. It was already very dark. I don't know exactly what time it was, but it was past 10 p.m. when we decided to sit down and rest for an hour among the bushes. I was afraid that a snake or some dangerous insect might come out, so I couldn't rest and was always alert. There were women and 2 children in our group who fell asleep within minutes after we sat down. I was watching the area along with another man. We couldn't have our lamps on because we didn't want the border patrol to catch us. We were sitting there in the darkness. There was very little light from the moon, which was our only source of illumination. Suddenly we heard the cry of a baby. It sounded a bit distant, but the sound was unmistakable. It was a baby crying. Those who were asleep woke up and started asking where the sound was coming from, because we were alerted that there might be a small abandoned baby somewhere in the wilderness that could need help. We stood up again and decided to follow the uncontrollable crying of the baby. Carefully, we walked through the bushes, and the crying got louder and louder. A woman who was with us was walking very quickly, desperate to get to that poor baby. She even tripped several times over the stones that were everywhere. But when we got to where the crying was coming from, it suddenly stopped. We started searching all around to see if there was a baby lying among the bushes or under the large rocks that were in the area, but we found nothing. Then, a man called out to us and told us to look between 2 medium-sized rocks. There was a cross stuck in the ground made of wooden sticks, and on top of the cross, there was a small stuffed bear. Everything made sense then. 2 of the women who were with us started crying and made us all say a prayer for the little baby who had lost its life so that it could leave and not be there alone, scared and unable to move on. After that, we continued our journey and didn't hear any more crying. There was no baby anywhere. I swear we searched very well throughout that area, but there was nothing. That was the only thing we found. The entire way, I continued with a lump in my throat. It was very hard to witness. Although I must tell you something else that filled me with fear during the journey. A woman sowed fear in the group by saying that such a pure soul as that of a baby could not be suffering in this world, so it very likely could have been an evil entity, some demon pretending to be a baby. This is just one of the paranormal stories that happened to me during my attempts to reach the United States. Thank you all for listening to my story. Have a good evening. Hello, my name is Jose Aron. I am from Guatemala, and a few years ago, I crossed the border between Mexico and the United States illegally. Most of my family lives here, and I dreamed of the American dream, to come here, work, and send money to my mother and ex-wife so that my son could have a better life. In Guatemala, we lived with many hardships, and the situation was very difficult. So I decided, along with a neighbor, to embark on the journey to Mexico, and from there, cross the Rio Bravo. Many of our relatives had done it that way, so we decided that would be our way to cross. We arrived in a border town in Mexico with the United States where we camped for several days, waiting for the waters to calm down a bit. The river's current was, as its name suggests, very fierce. It had rained a lot those days, making it extremely dangerous. Other migrants had told us that several people had drowned there, and that there was no one to rescue them because there wasn't enough equipment in that small town. So we waited a few days for the water to recede and the river to calm down. Finally, the day, or rather the night, arrived. We couldn't risk doing it during the day and getting caught by immigration, so we opted to cross at dawn. Although they patrol at all hours, it was harder for them to see us at 2:30 in the morning. At approximately that time, my neighbor, 2 other men and I decided it was the perfect moment to cross the river. The water was very calm, the current had decreased, and everything was very quiet and completely silent. So it was the right moment. I was very scared, I won't deny it. Although I knew how to swim, I knew I could face many other dangers in those waters, such as animals or the risk of getting caught on a branch underwater. But my desire to achieve the famous and cursed American dream was greater. In those adrenaline-filled moments, nothing else mattered. And I did it. We were already halfway across the river and everything was going relatively well when suddenly I felt something, or rather someone, grab my ankle. I clearly felt a hand wrapping its fingers around my ankle because I was wearing shorts, and I felt the hand directly on my skin. That hand started to pull me. It wasn't dragging me under, but it wouldn't let me move forward. I started to panic, trying to stay afloat. I knew I shouldn't make noise, but I had to ask my companions for help. I shouted to them that someone was pulling me from below and begged them to help me because I was already in a panic. They grabbed my hand and helped me reach the other side, but at no point did I feel that hand let go while they were pulling me to the shore. I stopped feeling it only when we were about to reach land. I collapsed onto the ground among the branches and began to cry uncontrollably. I couldn't stop telling them that someone was there and that we needed to look for them because they were at the shore. I was sure it was a person who had grabbed my ankle. 2 of my companions returned to the water, walked a few steps where the water reached only to their waists, and I saw one of them pull out what looked like a head. He slowly dragged it to the shore, and as they got closer, it became more noticeable that it was a man's body, but it was already in an advanced state of decomposition. We didn't know how many days he had been at the bottom of the river, but that wasn't the most shocking part. What stunned us the most was that he had grabbed my ankle while being lifeless. It was something incredible. Maybe he just wanted us to find him and take him out of there, but that didn't make it any less horrifying and terrifying for me. It left me with some traumas because seeing him in that state was terrifying, and knowing he had chosen me to grab onto is something that still keeps me awake at night. Unfortunately, we couldn't do anything more for him. We left him lying on the shore because we couldn't take him with us or do anything else for him. We had to continue our journey before immigration caught us. But I cried the whole way and was trembling uncontrollably. I was very scared, cold, and I think I was in shock the entire time. It's simply something I wouldn't wish on anyone, but sadly, it's something that happens every day at the border with all those people trying to cross illegally. I just hope that immigration found him and identified him to notify his family, because we know that someone was probably waiting for him or waiting for news about him. The only thing I can say is that he wasn't the first nor the last to lose his life in that river trying to cross. Good evening. I want to share my experience as a migrant anonymously, as I recently managed to cross the border illegally, and I prefer to avoid trouble. However, I cannot let this pass without sharing it. You see many things while trying to cross into the United States, especially on the Mexican side, and what we saw is worth sharing. If you're a skeptic, you might want to stop here. But if you have an open mind and understand that strange and dark things exist, it's worth staying. We had been crossing a mountain for 2.5 days. There were only 5 of us, all men from different Latin American countries. Of course, we were exhausted, hungry, and thirsty, since we had to ration our water and food to make it to the other side. I remember the night came. Another night in that dark and cold place. I swear there is nothing more eerie than being among mountains at night. You see snakes slithering by your feet, spiders of all kinds, and the cold is hard to bear. But that wasn't the worst of it. One of us started feeling very ill. He was dizzy and said he couldn't go on. He needed food and a lot of water. We gave him the water we had, but it wasn't enough. We needed help for him, but who could we ask in the middle of nowhere? Suddenly we saw a small light far from us. It was very strange to see light in that place, as we were practically in the middle of a mountain with nothing around. I pointed it out to my companions, and we all agreed to go see what it was, hoping we could get help for our friend. So we helped him walk. It took us about half an hour to approach the light, moving very stealthily and trying to hide among the bushes, as it could have been the border patrol. But no, when we got closer we saw a very small cabin, and the light we saw was a bonfire outside it. One of my companions almost ran to ask for help, but I stopped him and made him crouch down again. We needed to see who it was. It wasn't normal for someone to be living there. We didn't know what kind of people were inside or if we could trust them. So we all waited there, crouched several yards from the place, waiting for someone to come out, if anyone did. It was very dangerous to approach, as it could have been a criminal group. A few minutes passed when suddenly we saw an old woman dressed in black come out. Her hair reached almost to her knees, and without judging, she looked very spooky. She had a disturbing appearance. She began placing things around the bonfire. We couldn't see what they were as we were too far away to make out small objects. Then an old man of about the same age as the woman came out, at least he appeared to be. He also had a spooky look. He had long gray hair and his clothes were stained red. He was helping her place the objects, and then we saw them pull a human torso out of the cabin. They threw it into the fire and started chanting prayers we couldn't understand. We were terrified watching all this. We couldn't leave as we might make noise by stepping on a branch or tripping over something. I remember one of my companions had his hand over his eyes as he didn't want to see that macabre scene, but I kept watching. It didn't take long before we saw several snakes approaching the bonfire, but they were standing, swaying in a terrifying manner. One of my companions whispered, "This is a satanic ritual. We have to leave." We crawled away, careful not to step on any branches or anything that could make noise. Our companion, who was very ill, had to drag himself as he had no strength left in his legs to crawl. We continued without stopping for a long time. No one dared to look back. We were all very scared and didn't want to see anything else. Eventually, I gathered the courage to look back, and fortunately, we were already very far away. The light was now very small again, they couldn't hear us anymore. So I let everyone know we could stand up and run as fast as possible from that place, getting as far away as we could. We walked for hours until dawn. For me, it was a relief to see the first ray of light. It felt like a true gift. We managed to cross and get help for our companion. The rest is no longer part of this paranormal story, but it was undoubtedly something very intense to witness. We don't know if that torso belonged to someone like us who was trying to cross the border and had the misfortune of encountering those horrible old people, or asking for help at that cabin. To begin with, we didn't know how anyone could live in such an isolated place. There wasn't even a path for cars. We didn't know how they survived, and to this day, we still don't. We have no explanation. Thank you for listening to this terrible experience. Good evening, everyone. This is Carlos Heredia speaking. I'm from El Salvador, and I want to share an experience I had in 2010 while trying to cross illegally into the United States. I traveled alone to Mexico. I decided to leave my country, which at the time was plagued by crime, making it impossible to progress. My wife and I had a small restaurant, but criminal gangs demanded a large sum of money from us each month, which they called the quota. We were not doing well in the restaurant, and most of our earnings were taken by them. So I decided to go to the United States, where a cousin of mine, who also went illegally a few years ago, was doing well. I did it mainly for my wife and my 2 children, to give them a better life. I knew the crossing wouldn't be easy, I had that in mind, but I never imagined I would see so many things that would leave a lasting mark on me. Upon reaching the Mexico-United States border, I paid a significant amount of money to a smuggler to help me cross. We would go through the desert. We were a large group of people. I entrusted myself to God and began the long journey, where I saw bodies of people reduced to bones. The smuggler told us not to pay attention, to ignore everything we saw, and keep moving forward. He wouldn't wait for anyone who lagged behind. The first night was tough. It was hard to walk on the sand in complete darkness. I began to feel an unusual fatigue, a heaviness in my body that I had never experienced before. And I was in good shape, but the heaviness was incredible. The vibe in that place didn't help much, and I attribute it to the mental exhaustion I felt, which prevented me from continuing. I stopped for a moment because my legs no longer responded. My body was simply exhausted. I had reached my limit and had to stop. I remember a man yelling at me to keep moving or I might get lost, and I told him not to worry, that I would catch up in a few moments. I really needed to sit down, even if just for a few seconds to recover. But I lost track of time, and suddenly I couldn't see or hear them anymore. They had gone too far. That's when I got up with all the strength I had left and started taking small steps, struggling a lot, but I wanted to see them, to know they were still there and hadn't left me alone. It didn't take long to realize they had indeed left me behind. I was completely alone and lost in that vast desert, with only a bottle of water and an energy bar left. That was all I had to survive. I walked for an unknown amount of time, but there was no one around. I remember collapsing to the ground and crying. I was very cold, scared, and uncertain about how I would get out of there. I was completely alone. Hours passed until dawn, and to cut the story short, I spent the entire day walking to see if I could reach any place, but I ran out of water, and my energy bar was gone. I was exhausted and without an escape. Night fell again, and I was lying on the ground without any hope. I had resigned myself to being one of the many people who get lost in that desert, and no one would find me for a long time. I cried and only thought about my children when suddenly I heard footsteps in the sand. I lifted my face and tried to see with the small pocket flashlight I had who it was. Suddenly I saw a young man approaching me. I was very glad to finally see someone. I got up and asked for help, telling him I was lost. To be honest, when I saw his face, he looked lost too, as his face reflected a deep sadness. He didn't say anything to me, he just walked in front of me and I stood there observing him. Suddenly I heard him say, "Follow me." I took my backpack and went behind him, but he never spoke to me, never asked me anything. I followed him because he was my only hope of reaching some place to ask for help. I was on the verge of dehydration. I wasn't even thinking about crossing the border anymore. All I wanted was to get out of there alive and return to see my children. We walked for a long time. I had no sense of time, so I can't tell you for how many hours or minutes we walked, but it was still night when suddenly I saw some lights. It was a U.S. immigration patrol. They stopped right in front of us and 2 officers got out. I felt very happy. I didn't care if they sent me back to Mexico. I was happy to have found someone to get me out of that hell. When the officers saw me, they ran to help me because I collapsed on the ground. I didn't have the strength to stand. I was dehydrated and hadn't eaten in days. They helped me up and put me in the truck. I looked around and told them to help the boy who was with me, but they told me there was no one else, that when they saw me I was walking alone. I insisted, telling them that there was someone else, that a young man had helped me reach them, and he was also in a very bad state. I asked them to look for him to help him, but they told me there was no one else, not even footprints of another person. I had been walking alone the whole time. They got me to safety, and when I was better, they sent me back to Mexico. where I took the first flight home. But I still wonder who that young man was who appeared out of nowhere and guided me to the police. Was it an angel? Or was it someone who had died in that place trying to cross just like me? It's something I'll never know, but I'll always be eternally grateful. Now I'm happily living in my country because things have improved, and we can have a happy life. But what I experienced in that place is something that will always be in my mind. It is, to date, the most intense thing I've ever lived through. Thank you for listening to these stories. I hope you enjoyed them. Much more content is on the way. Subscribe and activate the little bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Have a great evening, everyone. See you next time.